Reading today, I'd like to share this. It's called What You Missed That Day You Were Absent from Fourth Grade, and it was written by Brad Aaron Maudlin. Mrs. Nelson explained how to stand still and listen to the wind, how to find meaning in pumping gas, how peeling potatoes can be a form of prayer. She took questions on how not to feel lost in the dark. After lunch, she distributed worksheets that covered ways to remember your grandfather's voice. Then the class discussed falling asleep without feeling you had forgotten to do something else, something important, and how to believe the house you wake up in is your home. This prompted Mrs. Nelson to draw a chalkboard diagram detailing how to chant the Psalms during cigarette breaks, and how not to squirm for sound when your own thoughts are all you hear. Also, that you have enough. The English lesson was that I am is a complete sentence. And just before the afternoon bell, she made the math equation look easy, the one that proves that hundreds of questions and feeling cold and all those nights spent looking for whatever it was you lost and one person add up to something. I invite us to move into a time of sacred time and reflection silently. I invite you to get comfortable in your seats, perhaps close your eyes, and let's take a few nice deep breaths together, just following the empty breath. As we breathe, we let go of the concerns and thoughts of the day, of the week behind us or the week ahead of us, the year behind us or the year ahead of us. And we allow ourselves to breathe into this moment, now, in stillness. We breathe into the place beneath such concerns, where we can remember that as we all sit together in silence, we are at the very center of our being, of the same essence, cut from the same cloth, yearning for the same peace, the same joy, carrying the same sorrows, sitting together in silence. I invite us to come back to this time and place. I call this talk Spiritual Report Cards. And I have been running away from failure ever since I was first aware there was such a thing as a report card. I couldn't imagine anything worse than getting an F, the humiliation, the disgrace. So I made sure that I never did. I actually lived through my school years believing that my grade point average and my self-worth were one and the same thing. Even though ultimately a 4.0 GPA was flimsy proof, indeed, of any kind of self-worth, but still a string of A's did offer some momentary consolation and camouflage, if you will, for my true failure as a boy, as a straight boy doing straight boy things, not like the other boys at all. It leads me to wonder how many of us live our lives as if there will be a report card at the end, as if we'll be judged ultimately on the meaning we made of our lives, or the meaning in our work, or how many things we acquired, how much money we made, or what kind of a parent were we. Or conversely, living with the bone-chilling fear that I must have been absent that day, unaware that this particular moral challenge would be on the final exam, and I blew it. Sharon is facing the imminent end of her life, ovarian cancer, and she wrestles with that very fear. Michael, I think I'm a good person and I've lived a decent life, but I've made my mistakes, big ones. I have my regrets. What if I don't get into heaven? As if she will be judged ultimately on her resume and not on, say, the love that's in her heart or what she learned along the way, if she's even to be judged at all. My grandmother, Barbara, my dad's mom, was one tough cookie. So tough, in fact, that her standard reply to the greeting, "How are you?" was, "I'm just as mean as usual." I don't believe in failure, she would say. There's no such thing because you can always learn something. It's a pretty commonly held perception, particularly among those given to positive thinking as a way of navigating through life, and certainly within the mythos of American notions of success. But what I found lacking in my grandmother's declaration was compassion. If I were brokenhearted that I didn't get the thing I wanted more than anything else, devastated really after working so hard to get it, I really didn't want to hear, "Well, I'm not going to feel sorry for you because you're going to learn something through this." That wasn't helpful at all in the moment, even if it proved to be true in time. Compassion, after all, only means to be with suffering, to be with it, not to fix it or correct it or advise it or compare it. It's not a small or easy thing. I would venture to say that authentic compassion for ourselves and for one another might be the one true great healer. And yet it's not an attribute I've ever seen on any report card or any measuring stick for success. At the same time, I resonate deeply with the writings of Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl. In the end, everything can be taken from a man, but this one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. So there it is. Maybe it is ultimately up to us to write our final grade, to cast that final verdict. But I find myself struggling with this all too human urge to cast any verdict at all, this need to see life through this dualistic lens of success and failure, win and lose. What if it's not so simple as that? What if it's not so clear-cut as that? In the early 90s, I had my own design business, and a big economic recession hit Los Angeles at the time, and my business fell off to zero. I needed to do something quick. As a stopgap survival strategy, I took what was called the CBEST test. I got an emergency teaching credential, and I was hired as a substitute school teacher for Inglewood Unified School District. Now, Inglewood at the time was a very underserved, depressed area of Los Angeles, and this was a few weeks after the Rodney King's uprisings in Los Angeles. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but soon enough, I discovered I did not have the constitution to face those schools every day. So on my off days, I volunteered at Project Angel Food, delivering home-cooked meals to homebound people with AIDS. These were the peak years of the AIDS crisis, and I got involved with the fledgling volunteer AIDS hospice group called Project Nightlight. But at the time, I felt like an abject failure, the loser of the world. No one could convince me otherwise. I assiduously avoided friends who might call me, dare to ask the unthinkable question, "So what are you doing these days?" What's more, I was convinced that somehow I was a spiritual failure, that God had somehow dispensed all the components to live a successful life to everyone else except me. Firmly attached to that idea. And yet when I look back on that point in time now, I see it as the pivot point that made this part of my life possible, that opened the door and pointed this pathway toward chaplaincy, this career that I love so much, though it took so many years to materialize, a career that fills my life with meaning and seems to make sense of the whole circuitous path so far. So am I to look back on that point in time now and call it a success? even a blessing, hurting so badly that I wanted to die. The older I get, I find the less patience I have for that dualistic either or kind of thinking. In the world of cancer, our perceptions of success and failure become much more challenging. The stakes are too high. If this disease means the imminent end of my physical body, does that mean that Western medicine failed? My doctor failed. My vegan diet failed. My affirmations failed. My prayers failed. God failed me. I failed God. But these profound experiences of failure are not just the province of patience. Over the years, I've walked beside countless folks left behind, the bereaved, and they too wrestle almost universally with profound experiences of failure. If I hadn't spent so much time at work, I could have spent more time with her. She might still be here. If it weren't for my moodiness, my depression, my anxiety, I know I caused her so much distress, and that's why the cancer came back, Michael. It's my fault. If I had just insisted that he go to the doctor sooner, if we just gotten a second opinion. The thing about this need to cast a verdict one way or the other, I find, is that very seldom is there room for the verdict to be not guilty. Deanna is living with a very aggressive colon cancer. She's also deeply rooted in a belief system that might best be termed as New Age. She believes that she can manifest and create her life as she imagines it through her positive affirmations and attitude and prayer and belief. And up until now, that philosophy has served her rather well. She's found herself a wonderful mate in life, and she continues to enjoy success in her business. But the tables have turned now, and her disease is progressing. She's a planner and a goal setter. She likes goals with nice, tidy, measurable outcomes. So each win only solidifies her faith that much more. How could it be otherwise? But as I say, the tables have turned. As her disease progresses, that whole paradigm of goal setting becomes far more challenging, even murky. If cure is medically off the table, what's the most she can hope for? Just more time living with chronic cancer. What's more, she feels like a spiritual failure. Michael, I guess my prayers weren't good enough. My affirmations weren't strong enough. My faith wasn't deep enough. It's my fault. Over 20 years ago, I was covering an overnight on-call shift at UCLA Medical Center. It was late on a Sunday night, and I was paged to come up to the ICU. An elderly woman, the matriarch of a large African-American family, was very near death, and the family wanted some support and a prayer. I offered them that, and I left. A few hours later, I was paged to return to the unit because the woman had passed. And now the family wanted just company while they waited for their pastor to arrive. Once he arrived, he took one look at the scene and he said, "It looks like you all didn't pray hard enough." As if this loving family had failed their mother, as if death itself were a failure. And if that's true, all of us are guaranteed an F on our final report card. Spiritual success, spiritual failure, these are tricky concepts, again, with this either or thinking. Over the years, I've walked beside countless folks, many who would profess to have a deep faith, many who would say they have no faith at all, but all with a common longing for strength. I wish I were stronger. I wish I believed more. I wish my faith were stronger. When we tease that apart, what do you mean by that? Strong faith. It usually means certainty. I want to know that I'm going to beat this cancer. I want to know that I've got the best doctor. I want to know this drug trial is going to work. I want to know that my prayers will be answered, that the Lord has my back. Paul Tillich, German-American theologian, says that the opposite of faith isn't doubt, it's certainty. If I'm certain, I'm not really walking in faith anymore, am I? Faith, in my view, might better be described as a willingness to step off into the unknown with my doubts and fears in tow, and continuing to walk anyway, with my heart and eyes open, with curiosity, with patience, with humility, with compassion, even for my experience of failure. With Deanna, who liked to set nice, tidy goals, we looked at what another goal might be for her that would not have such a tidy, measurable outcome. What about a goal of coming to peace with uncertainty, with doubt, with her powerlessness, offering herself the grace to be a human being with more questions than answers? Through these years of the pandemic and all of the extreme measures we have had to endure, there have been those among us, myself included, who have sought to somehow reframe, redefine our notions of spiritual success because the times have seemed to demand it. And there have been those among us, eternally optimistic spiritual folks, who have likened this to a golden opportunity, a chance to hit the reset button for life on planet Earth, to refine and distill all of the extraneous down to what is absolutely essential. And they embrace this time. Not me. I have grieved deeply. I never realized how much of a people person I am, how much of an extrovert, that for me, real human contact, physical presence is like oxygen to me. It becomes the stuff of life. It may be even close to the meaning of life itself. So much so that for me, sitting in a darkened, sold-out theater, knee to knee with strangers, being moved to laughter or tears by the same humanity on a stage becomes a religious ritual. Just as it is to gather with my dancing chums on Saturday afternoon and dance together in the same studio, in front of the same mirror, dancing to the same music. And afterward, getting to partake in Holy Communion, getting to complain about everything that hurts. Just as it is to travel to some faraway land, to get lost in some alleyway among a bunch of locals, many of whom may never have even heard of Los Angeles. Just as it is to hug someone in trouble, a friend, a loved one, a patient, a stranger. So much so that when for so long these experiences were off the table for the foreseeable future, maybe even for the rest of my life, I'm embarrassed to say a part of me wondered whether life was worth living, realizing that my resilience, my adaptability had hit its limitation, not like those spiritually optimistic folks at all. And in those moments, I would call myself a spiritual failure and give myself an F. By contrast, Bernadette is 31 years old. She has the most incredible sense of curiosity, acceptance, and humor. She seems to live her life in the place of, gee, I wonder what that would be like. So much so that when she began her chemotherapy and her beautiful head of red hair began to fall out, we had that conversation I often have, generally with women facing that particular crucible. Some will choose to shave their heads preemptively as a kind of self-empowering gesture. Some might choose to make a lighthearted ritual out of it, dye their hair pink and have their friends over for a shaving party. No, Bernadette said, I just think it'd be really interesting to watch your hair fall out. And when her treatment was complete and that year had come to a close, she was reflecting on the year that had passed and said, you know, Michael, all in all, I guess I'd have to say it was a pretty good year after all. Bernadette, in a year that includes a cancer diagnosis, chemotherapy, radical double mastectomy, radiation, reconstruction therapy, if that doesn't count for a bad year, what on earth would? I don't know, she said, losing my sense of humor, I guess. A spirit like that cannot be broken. I walked beside Grace over the last 6 years of her life, ovarian cancer. Grace had lived a life of dizzying twists and turns, both personally and professionally, zigzagging her way across the country. I asked her once, Grace, if there were a young person in your life, maybe a grandchild, wanted some advice to you, came to you and said, Grace, what piece of wisdom do you have for somebody like me after having lived such an interesting life? She didn't take much time at all to respond. When the time comes, she said, be ready to go. She actually echoes Joseph Campbell as he describes the hero's journey. In order to be a hero, one must be prepared for when the moment comes. That might be the point of all spirituality, he said. Donna and Lois had shared the previous 40-some years of their lives together, so at ease with one another, so loving toward one another, creating family in a culture that is really hostile to two women calling themselves a family. Over the last 7 or 8 years, Lois had been living with ovarian cancer. And as her disease progressed, she chose to take advantage of aid in dying medication available here in California for when the going got to be too rough. She was an engaging, vibrant, no-nonsense gal who was way more interested in hearing what you had to say than telling her story one more time. Sometimes it was hard to know, in fact, how much suffering she was carrying because she did it with such grace. Though thoroughly contemporary, she knew her way around a computer, she was also deeply rooted in old school virtues like letter writing and sending thank you notes. One Saturday night, she leaned over and said to Donna, honey, I think the time has come and I'm going to take the medication tomorrow. Well, honey, if it's that bad, why not take it tonight? I can't. I got too many things to do. What do you have to do that's so important? Well, I've got some bills to pay and some birthday cards to send and some thank you notes to write. I'll help you do that, Donna said. So after 80-some years of life on planet Earth, she spent the very last night of her life sitting around the dining table with her beloved Donna, engaged in the most mundane human activities, but activities that are nevertheless rooted in consideration, connectedness, kindness. That is an image of spiritual success in my book. The next morning, she got up and put on her best red silk pajamas and said, I guess I might as well go out in style. If there were such a thing as spiritual report cards, I'd give them both an A+. As I would to Bernadette for her unfailing capacity for curiosity, humor, acceptance, as I would to Grace for her unbelievable ability to ride the wave of life. Strong faith, strong spirit, you bet, and not a shred of certainty inside. If there is such a thing as a spiritual report card, I imagine it would be rooted in our capacity for compassion, for ourselves and for one another, for life as it is and as it is not in any given moment, to come to peace with our own doubts and fears and powerlessness, and perhaps even discovering a deeper power, quite paradoxically, in that, being peaceful with powerlessness. I'm a big documentary film fan, and I remember in 1995, a wonderful Oscar-nominated documentary called Troublesome Creek. It's a story of a family farm in Iowa that had been in the family for generations, over 125 years. Russell and Mary continue to work the farm, though they're much older now, having raised their kids who have all moved on. But they're facing foreclosure because of a farming crisis. So it's all hands on deck. All the kids come back to Iowa to do what they can to save the family farm. We're given to believe it will kill mom and dad if they lose the farm and have to move into town. So you're kind of dying a little bit as you're watching them auction off the farm equipment and the livestock and their furniture. You see Mary caressing her Ethan Allen dining table. Oh, the Thanksgiving dinners I served at this table. Sold. They can't lose the farm. but they do. And to everyone's shock and amazement, Russell and Mary thrive. Russell is a new man, unencumbered by all of that backbreaking labor and nonstop worry. One of these guys that has those wild, untamed, bushy eyebrows that go every which way. You wonder, what's up with the eyebrows, Russell? There he is in the barber chair, getting them all trimmed up, looking his best. I'll never forget the last line of the film. It's narrated by their daughter, Jean. Success and failure. Sometimes it's hard to tell which is which. Yes, it is. So be it. Thank you.